last Tuesday, I have tried to feed and enhance your susceptibility to the phenomenological approach. I have argued that the world is not the sum of objects or a totality of things, but a crossroad, a patchwork of different perspectives. Poignantly put, I have tried to initiate you in the notion of the fullness of contingent unconcealment. And although these words may have sounded and may still sound dark, deep, and complex, I hope I have succeeded in showing you how simple and evident this notion is. All it takes is to make a little effort to shake up some of our thinking habits, like the assumption that things have clear and definite contours and contents. There's a wonderful book by Gregory Bateson, Towards an Ecology of Mind, in which he has a discussion with his daughter, and they come to the conclusions that there are no dotted lines in reality. You know, long ago you had these drawings that you only had dots, and all you had to do was combine the dots and then you would see what was there. There are no dotted lines in reality. I have illustrated this notion of contingent, changing, the variety of unconcealments by describing a landscape from different perspectives: the farmer, the hiker, the painter, two lovers, maybe three, and a land surveyor. There are no dotted lines in reality.
So welcome back to First Philosophy. I'm, of course, Sonia Kas.
I am Kas I.
And we're happy to welcome you back on our little exploration.
Our exploration into the world of phenomenology.
Indeed. And this episode is very interesting. We're working up towards talking very seriously about Kierkegaard. And so this episode goes in a variety of places. We're going to be talking about Nietzsche. We'll even talk about Wittgenstein a little bit. But it is a setup that I think really enriches the further discussion of Kierkegaard.
And I think it is worth pointing out that for a course in phenomenology and continental philosophy, which might be an industry term, but that just means this kind of philosophy, mostly in Germany and France, it is kind of unusual to use Wittgenstein as an example or as a philosopher to refer to. And this goes back to what Awee is doing throughout all the lectures, which is not narrowing your vision to what canonical phenomenological philosophy should be or is. You could say this is a lecture about Kierkegaard, so why listen to an entire setup where he talks about a lot of other philosophers as well? And I think if you listen to this episode, if you listen to this entire setup, you'll have such a good picture of what Kierkegaard is actually doing and reacting against. Mm-hmm. And also in what way Kierkegaard is a special kind of philosopher, which would definitely be missing if you didn't have the entire backstory and if you didn't have the juxtaposition of Kierkegaard and Wittgenstein, or Kierkegaard, and as we also delve into Descartes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it is something that is very worthwhile focusing on. Listening to this setup is the same. You can't do a joke with just a punchline.
That's true. And I mean, famously, we all know that true philosophy is the friends we made along the way. And I think this is a perfect example of that. So without further ado, I think it's time for us to start.
Let's delve into it.
Now, in our first meeting, I also offered a brief impression of the history of Western philosophy, moving from mythos, chaos, to cosmos, to logos. Mythos, telling stories to find some structure in a overall incomprehensible universe. Cosmos, finding a first principle that is in everything. And then logos, the attempt to finding a true understanding of everything that is, conceptualizing the world to the full. Now, the endeavor of logos has been thoroughly challenged by what has often been called a decisive text in the decisive works of Nietzsche, The Death of God. You find in your textbook in Canvas, the gay science fragment number 125, The Madman, where a man goes into a marketplace and he's with a lantern and he's looking for God. I'm looking for God, he tells everybody, and everybody laughs. You're looking for God. Bright daylight, he's looking for God. So everybody laughs at him. It's a marketplace, who cares about God? And everybody says, well, maybe he's gone on holiday, or maybe he's hiding. We don't know. And then the madman says, no, he's not hiding, he's dead, and we have killed him. And then the madman rather dramatically says, how could we have done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? Where are we moving now? Aren't we perpetually falling backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Aren't we straying as through an infinite nothing? Now, I already mentioned in the first class, the Death of God is not an anti-religious text. What Nietzsche is saying here is the death of God is the death or the end of all ultimate philosophical truths. There is no fundamental truth in life. There is no fundamental being that supports life. There is no supreme goal or meaning in life, not in history, and not in our personal lives either. We are straying through an infinite nothing. Elsewhere he writes, nothingness forever, das Nichts ewig. And Nietzsche wrote these words in the 1850s. And of course these were scandalous. And he said, I'm come too early, the madman says. I come too early. It'll take about 150 years. He doesn't say it in this fragment, but Nietzsche writes it in his Nachlass, his later works. It takes about 150 years, so 150 years, before we will realize. And if I would now say, long ago we would have place where I could write on, but if I would say now, God is dead, write this down, you would just say, God is dead. No, hardly any one of you will be appalled. 20th century philosophy and 21st century philosophy has indeed, with some exceptions, an anti-metaphysical stance. We don't think there is an ultimate goal, an ultimate meaning in life. We live in the era of science and technology. Technology is considered to be a means to an end. Technology is as such neutral, instrumental. It has no inherent values. Science is also value-free. This is what positive science, positivism, is all about. Only facts count, empirical facts. So both have a positivistic stance, but philosophically speaking, also, and as such, a nihilistic stance. We see this everywhere. Ethics has become pragmatic reasoning, politics. We negotiate to find the best working solution. So what is left for philosophy? Well, Wittgenstein, one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, wrote a book in which he said, okay, this is what philosophy can be, and all philosophy can be. The famous Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which starts, it's just an attempt to only say the things we can say. I just write some things that he starts off with. The world is all that is the case. The world is the totality of facts. The world is determined by the facts and by their being all the facts. For the totality of facts determines what is the case and also whatever is not the case. The facts in logical space are the world divides into facts. Each item can be the case or not the case, while everything else remains the same, etc., 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 etc. He goes on to just write down what we can be absolutely sure of. He even assures us death is not an event in life. We do not live to experience death. We'll see in Heidegger that this is quite not the case. But then also, all of a sudden he writes, the world of the happy man is different from the world of the unhappy man. Nobody can really get over phenomenology. Most famous is the final chapter, it's only one line, where Wittgenstein writes, final proposition, what we cannot speak about we must pass over in silence. What we cannot speak about, God, religion, ethics, maybe even aesthetics, we cannot no longer say what is beautiful and what is not beautiful, what is good and what is bad. These times are over. What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence. Now, if we read this last sentence in the context of Wittgenstein's later philosophy, because Wittgenstein was a great admirer of Kierkegaard, the hero of our class today. Kierkegaard was a great inspiration to Wittgenstein, and in fact, and not everybody knows this, while preparing the Tractatus, Wittgenstein indeed wrote about religion. I'll just quote it. It's from his journals, written in the trenches of the First World War in concentration camps, where he was being captive. To believe in God means to see that the facts of the world are not the end of the matter. That's all he says. To believe in God means to see that life has a meaning. Now, you might read this in a critical sense. He's just describing what happens in religion. To believe in God means, but to see that life has a meaning. It's under pressure of Bertrand Russell and more that Wittgenstein omitted this from the Tractatus. In his later works, Wittgenstein writes, directly concerning this last phrase of the Tractatus, what we cannot speak about, we must still somehow address, somehow approach, somehow articulate, and somehow embrace. In his journals, Wittgenstein writes. And this is exactly what Kierkegaard is doing. Find ways, find text, find literature to describe and address what lies beyond the limits of scientific and logical thinking. Because Kierkegaard is not science. One of his famous, largest book is called The Unscientific Postscript. So the unscientific, it's unscientific. Okay, let's look at our hero of today, Søren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard is a 19th century philosopher who, and although he's not mentioned as such in the handbooks of philosophy, can easily be discovered as considered to be the fourth master of suspicion. By the way, Dostoevsky could be mentioned as the fifth, but this is about Kierkegaard, the fourth master of suspicion. We've seen that Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche have shown that the subject to Freud is a poor thing, a diplomat navigating between stronger forces. It's not autonomous, it's not rational. The subject, according to Marx, is a product of socio-economic forces. The subject, according to Nietzsche, is an illusion. We just invented ourselves as a unity within the chaos that we live. We are hanging in dreams on the back of a tiger. But mind you, Kierkegaard's position is not downgrading the subjective sphere, as Marx, Freud, and Nietzsche did. He is radicalizing the subjective sphere, way beyond the ego cogito, way beyond the isolated ego. The ego, the subject, the I, is an abstraction. It doesn't exist. Marx, Nietzsche, Freud said that. Kierkegaard would agree. The autonomous, rational subject. In the summary of the first class, I also wrote about the problem of Descartes. It may be true, the methodological doubt, which leads to cogito ergo sum. It may be absolutely certain that I think, but what I think remains uncertain. And furthermore, what this I that thinks really is uncertain, remains uncertain. And why I think the things I think remain uncertain. Descartes had a metaphysical position in which he thought there are two substances, two realms of reality which are excluded, which exist together. There's the subjective sphere, the ego cogito, the res cogitans, the thinking thing. And there's the body and the outside world, which is res extensa. There's two. And Descartes had a big problem here, because how can I even move my body if there's a substance, a thinking substance here, which is completely different from the substance that my body and my environment is. And Descartes had a rather ludicrous, sometimes you even wonder why Descartes has ever become so famous. There's the ridiculous, ludicrous solution that there's a pineal gland, a small part in our brain, where there's a connection between the two. And a very critical philosopher, Malebranche, even said, well, then if that is true, then God is a very busy entity, because he constantly has to make sure that this happens. Occasionalism is a very technical discussion, but every time we move our hands, because we think God must help us, because how could the pineal gland, which is res extensa, a thing, do this? So there's a lot of trouble in Descartes. But also, Descartes is the father of one of the biggest problems in modern philosophy and also in modern sciences, the so-called dichotomy of subject and object. We still have this idea that there's subjective sphere is fundamentally different from the objective sphere. Subject, Objekt-Spaltung, it's called in German philosophy, and everybody's working on it. Even Kant, I don't know if Julien addressed the phenomenon of the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, because Descartes said this, and Kant is trying to overcome Descartes, but still he's a Cartesian, because he says, if I'm critical enough, I must admit that all I see are phenomena, are appearances. I see appearances, but it would be uncritical to say that the appearances that I see are really reality. So there must be something that reality really is. This is not a world behind the things. No, it's the things in themselves, the Ding an sich, I cannot really see. We must admit that the ultimate reality of the world is unreachable for us, Kant said. And he even called it the scandal of philosophy, that we cannot ultimately prove the existence of the outside world. That's critical philosophy. Now, Martin Heidegger mentioned the true scandal of philosophy is that we even feel the need to find the proof for the existence of the outside world. This is just a product of a philosophical trick or a philosophical predicament that we got ourselves into by positing ourselves, or positing a subjective sphere and an objective sphere which is separated from it. It's just phenomenologically not true. It doesn't hold. We are always outside. We always are directed out. We are this directedness outside. We exist. The word exist, ex means out. We exist. We are always directed towards our surroundings, even towards what we might be in the future. We are directed towards what used to be. We are this outwardedness. We are this, abstract speaking, in between. So the objective sphere as abstractions, between, and the glue fails, der Kiet fehlt, there is no, you can't glue them together. We are the in-between. This is what Hannah Arendt meant when she used the word interesse, which she got from Kierkegaard, by the way. So, the theme of other masters of suspicion was how the outside world engulfs us and defines our subjectivity. Kierkegaard, as a master of suspicion, radically emphasizes full subjectivity. I believe, although Kierkegaard was a 19th century philosopher, he is an early phenomenologist. Kierkegaard's pivotal point of departure is the first-person perspective embraced to the full. So really taking personal existence to the full. And I'll already, this is a spoiler, but an important spoiler. Individual existence. So I exist, I am directed towards the world. I'm directed towards you, towards my past, towards the things that surround me, towards the things I want to do. So if I'm directed towards, I'm also directed towards that which is beyond my imagination, which is beyond anything I understand. So there's as such the possibility, let's make it stronger. There is as such a religious dimension in existence. That's why I use the word to the full. So, we're talking about subjectivity, to the full, personal existence, personal living. This is not the ego cogito, not the autonomous subject. Kierkegaard speaks of subjective truths. All the time he speaks of subjective truth. And it's very difficult for us contemporaries to read this, because he doesn't refer to subjective as opposed to objective truths, like the truths of science, which are better or more true. Primarily true are subjective, personal feelings, attitudes, anything. And these subjective truths are also not, in Descartes' sense, clear and distinct ideas. Idées claires et distinctes. That is what Descartes thought. If you really think, you only think clear and well distinct ideas. Not at all. That's also just another abstraction. It doesn't exist when you think. All thinking is mixed thinking, muddled thinking. Whatever you think, and let's even talk about very personal, emotional things. If you love somebody, there's always a little hate there too, and a little fear that they will leave you with it. It's mixed feelings. That's just a pure, clear and distinct love. And even in hate, there's always some respect in hate. You can only hate someone if somehow you have some respect. They are stronger than you, or whatever there is. So what Kierkegaard really wants to do is to build a great endeavor, an untiring crusade against all objective, impersonal philosophy. So philosophy can never be impersonal. Never, never, ever be something of the third person perspective. Let me begin by illustrating this with Kierkegaard's famous rewriting of the paradigmatic syllogism of Western philosophy written down by Aristotle. Everybody knows this syllogism. All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being. Socrates is mortal. You know, this is what you read everywhere. All human beings are mortal. This is the proposition. Second proposition, Socrates is a human being. Ergo, conclusion, Socrates is mortal. Now, Kierkegaard, this is a reasoning that is never contested and tirelessly taught at any department of philosophy. Kierkegaard revises this syllogism, and I stress this because I want to give you an impression of Kierkegaard's wit and profoundness. All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being. I am mortal. So, all human beings are mortal. Academics. Socrates is a human being. I am mortal. This may appear to be an insult to logical reasoning, but it is also, mind you, it is also more true than the truth of logic, because this offers the real conclusion, the ultimate conclusion, the realization of the true propositions This is the real conclusion, not that Socrates is mortal. I am mortal. That is what this syllogism is. When we speak of mortality, we must realize this is what being mortal ultimately is about. Individual beings, you and me, being mortal. Another side remark. Darian Leader has, as a psychoanalytic author, has written there's a rarely noticed personal grief and sadness hidden in Aristotle's syllogism. I really find this very wonderful what he wrote. Actually, the syllogism of Aristotle himself already says, alas, the honored, loved, great philosopher and teacher Socrates is human and therefore mortal. There's sadness in it. There may be, perhaps I think there always is, personal feelings in all logical arguments. Never tell this to Fred Muller, but I'm sure that I'm right. And deep down he is agreeing with me. The crucial insight is that mortality, being finite, directly involves each and every one of us, directly and personally. The Jewish philosopher Franz Rosenzweig once wrote, "With every step I take, the abyss of death opens up before my feet. But philosophy is constantly trying to lift me up and carry me across." Actually, this is what Aristotle is doing in his syllogism. He's writing about death, about mortality, but in such a way that it doesn't really hurt. Plato does the same with the world of ideas. That's where everything is. That's where truth. It's just as if you can forget about yourself. And although I hesitate to say this, but within this, the sustainability movement, climate crisis movement, if they talk about solutions, sometimes, this is an expression, I don't know if it's still popular, but in my time it was very popular. From cradle to cradle. That would be the solution of all our ecological problems. We have to find ways of recycling from cradle to cradle. And although I agree that it's wonderful that there is great concern about our planet, we must say that there is no other way from the cradle than to the grave. If you say from cradle to cradle, please keep on doing it, please make politics out of it, try to save the earth, but realize there's the other trick that Rosenzweig is warning us for. With every step I take, the abyss of death opens up before my feet, but philosophy is constantly trying to lift me up and carry me across. There is a persistent tendency in Western philosophy and in many Western philosophers, and maybe in almost everyone, to skillfully deny and evade our personal existence and reconcile the abyss of individual finitude by turning to the realm of objective or the realm of objective thoughts, of objectivity. Now, Kierkegaard traces this tendency specifically in the philosophy of German idealist Hegel, who is his main adversary. I'll be very brief on Hegel, don't worry, because I won't dwell into his philosophy. Hegel turned Plato's dialectics, his dialogues, and you've seen in the text on the allegory of the grave, of the cave, how the participants of the dialogue are always there. Someone has an argument, there's a counter-argument, and then they come to a higher insight. This is how the dialogues of Plato work. Socrates is talking with his friends, and this is what happens. Hegel tried to turn this dialectics into a metaphysics of reason, a system of the world that would lead to a total understanding of the world. So Hegel is the last great, maybe Husserl, but Hegel is considered to be the last great metaphysician. So there's Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, so Christian philosophy, Descartes, Kant, Hegel. And misleadingly enough, one of the famous books of Hegel is called The Phenomenology of Spirit. And now we have a problem. because for Hegel, phenomenology is understood as the historic, rational unfolding of absolute reason. You don't have to understand this, but it's just, if you get the gist, it's a completely different way of thinking. So absolute reason, if you start thinking from the most simple level of reality, and you really keep on thinking, your thinking, as will reality, will end up in absolute understanding of everything Hegel believed. Mark, this has got nothing to do with what I or Heidegger or Sartre or Merleau-Ponty consider to be phenomenology. But mind you, Hegelians will not agree with me. That's all right. So this is what Hegel's doing, progressing from the most abstract concepts towards an all-encompassing understanding of the world through the notion of contradiction. You may know this about it. This is a very basic understanding of Hegel or dialectic thinking. There's a thesis, there's an antithesis, and then you come to a synthesis. Then you come to a higher understanding. And this endeavor, Hegel's philosophy is fabulous in a double sense of the word. It's a wonderful endeavor, really to be respected. Schopenhauer, who really hated Hegel, he always planned his classes at the same time that Hegel gave class, but nobody came to Schopenhauer. He said Hegel's philosophy is science of the rooster, Galimatia. It's the arrogantly parading through the farmyard of the rooster. Kierkegaard said, so you have thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Hegel's philosophy is like a cow with 3 stomachs, digesting everything. But let's do some thinking. Let's do some thinking.
So, among other things, we've heard Awee talking about Descartes, and specifically about the predicament that Descartes kind of set out for Western philosophy of the so-called mind-body dualism, right? Mm-hmm. And this pineal gland, and what the hell is that? And this is definitely a very common way of reading Descartes, but I think it's maybe interesting for the listeners to know that it is definitely not the only way of reading Descartes, and actually some Cartesians will push back against that. And Descartes himself pushed back against that. We know this from his correspondence with Princess Elizabeth, which I would encourage everyone to read. It's a great starting point to get acquainted with Descartes, because Elizabeth sort of reads his works and has this correspondence where she asks questions and has these discussions with him. And he, in very approachable terms, clarifies a lot of things. Yeah. And Elizabeth raises the question, well, you postulated that this is so separate and I can't really quite grasp it. And Descartes in response says, oh, well, my bad, essentially. If it came out that way, this is really kind of not what I meant. I didn't mean to do this.
Yeah, it's a reading that has really lived throughout the history of philosophy. Yeah. And it is something that he admits, like, oh yeah, I did phrase it that way, but that is not what I meant. Yeah. Actually, I meant this. The letters are very readable because Princess Elizabeth was very well read, mm-hmm. And also hugely influential on the philosophy of Descartes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously, I don't think Awee obviously knows all of this. And this is not, he didn't do this to slander Descartes and sort of persuade listeners from ever engaging with him. No. It is more so, it plays a crucial role in the framing of his lectures.
And also a crucial role in the way the philosophers we treat in this entire podcast series, mm-hmm. how they have read and perceived Descartes.
Yeah, absolutely. So no gripes with Awee, but maybe for curious listeners, maybe you will find this an interesting and fruitful interjection.
There is another thing that we have talked about that might be a little bit abstract, which is the speaking of the unsayable. Mm-hmm. Don't be alarmed. Yes, this might sound vague at the beginning, but stay with it.
Yeah, because indeed, if someone tells you, well, now you have to speak about or say the unspeakable, it does seem immediately that someone is asking you for something impossible. But I think if we just change the terms, which Awee kind of does, he stops saying say or speak. He says articulate the unspeakable. And many philosophers kind of have this habit of defaulting to art. You know, they face a wall where you have to articulate the unspeakable, and they're like, well, art can do it. And honestly, I've been very skeptical of it for a long time. But just last week, I had this experience. I went to sort of a very small, low-key music festival, more like weird and experimental music. And I kind of got it because, you know, after I was tired, after, you know, you sleep in the tent and you go and you see these shows all day. And I was at this performance, if listeners are curious, this great artist, Radio Hito. And they were performing, I'm pretty sure it's she, her, so she was performing. And I kind of zoned out and entered in this almost meditative trance state in which the sum of the sum of the parts was more than kind of the parts itself. That is when I, for the first time, maybe I thought, oh, maybe they weren't so annoying with referring to art all the time. Maybe I finally get it. I
had a very similar experience when going to the concert by a band called Sun or Sun O. I'm not completely sure how to pronounce it correctly, but their point is they are loud, and when you're thinking, oh, loud, no, but louder, like you get multiple emails in advance, like to bring like proper like plugs and not just buy them at the concert, but like good quality plugs, and because the music is so loud. And the point is not that you listen to beautiful music. The point is that you are experiencing something that really that shows the limits of your experience.
Interesting.
It was phenomenal. It was, no pun intended. It was phenomenal. It was also scaringly loud, but they used projections also of like moving mountainscapes, and it really felt like you were listening to like audible mountains, audible walls of sound.
Yeah.
Which, that does show you something, that does articulate something that you cannot say in writing.
Yeah.
Even if you would go like, oh, I'm curious about this, let's put a Sun record on. It's not something you can ever replicate at home. It's impossible. You have to go there and like wear industry quality earplugs to experience. And even then it's loud.
Yeah.
It's scaringly loud. But the discussion about art is something that you will find throughout phenomenology, also by Heidegger, who will say that art is a way of expressing a form of the truth, which you cannot put to words. And he uses a painting by Van Gogh, and he uses a painting by Van Gogh. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing the English bullshit. But he uses an example by a painting of Van Gogh to explain that the shoes that you see in that artwork show you a way of living for a farmer that cannot just be merely expressed in words, which is a way of articulating that which cannot be spoken, which I think is a very beautiful sentiment and definitely worth of staying with that which cannot be said.
Yeah, and also maybe a good humbling point. We talked about humbleness before.
Yeah.
Of understanding that the reason and sort of the argumentative thinking will really, unfortunately, only get you so far. So also, once again, I'm calling to the listeners. If you, at some point, run into a wall of your own, do not despair.
Yeah.
And it is really worthwhile to just listen to some music, read some poetry, and try to feel something that you could not before.
Or try to create something.
Yeah.
Try to articulate it yourself.
This is the homework.
Coming back to the point that we were interjecting is Awee was talking about Hegel's philosophy. The question that Awee poses is, at first, what is the most general thing you can say about the world? And try to answer that.
I mean, I know the answer at this point. I think it's unfair.
No, I wasn't asking you. I know you know. So with the next homework assignment given out, let's continue with the lecture.
But let's do some thinking. So Hegel would ask us, or kicks off with the most abstract, general, immediate concept that we can have about the world. What would that be? What is the most general thing you can say about the world? You can't say it's green or something. So what is the most fundamental thing that you can say about that counts for everything?
It exists.
Sorry?
It exists.
It exists. So let's translate to a very neutral term, being. You agree? Being. That's good thinking. So I start with, where do I begin? If I really want, I don't want to get into the details. No, I want to say what can be said of everything. It is being. So what is the complete opposite, the antithesis of being? Nothing, nothingness. Okay? Nothingness, nothingness. Now we're getting into trouble. Now the creative minds have to work hard. What could be the synthesis of being and nothingness? So what phenomena has being in it and also nothingness? Wonderful, wonderful. Excellent. Becoming. It's nice philosophy. Hegel is very fun to read and do. Yes, becoming. There's being in becoming, but also nothingness, because it's still becoming. And so Hegel works on. This is how he works, always with threes. He looks at history, he says consciousness. Oh, there's 3 stages of consciousness. There's the consciousness of the Greek, there's self-consciousness of Descartes, and there's absolute consciousness in my system. The history of philosophy, according to Hegel, also is a teleology which goes straight into the highest richness of thinking. It begins in China, philosophy, and then it goes to India, and then it goes to Egypt, and then it goes to Judea, and then it goes to Greece, leaving African philosophy in oblivion, one of the scandals of Hegel's philosophy, because there were no books, only oral tradition, so that's not philosophy according to Hegel. So it went from the Greek to Rome, and then eventually it ended up in the Graf Wilhelmstrasse number 9 where Hegel lived. This is history of philosophy. Oh, Hegel always wanted everything to be in threes. There's a nice anecdote I heard when I was a student from Michael Petrie, professor in philosophy then. Hegel was studying hypnosis, and he asked his friends, do you know animals that can be hypnotized? And his friends started looking for answers, and they wrote him letters, and he got 4 letters. Chickens, rabbits, dogs, and guinea pigs. Hegel was in a bad mood. That's not to be. So he just, got rid of the guinea pigs. He just didn't write about them. If it doesn't fit the system, Hegel once must have said, too bad for reality. Umso schlimmer für die Wirklichkeit. Too bad for reality if it just doesn't fit. So this is what Hegel tries to do. A system that is reasonable and real. Nietzsche has commented, I already mentioned it, on this speculative philosophy. This is really hanging in dreams on the back of a tiger. Actually, life and the world are a ferocious will to power or constant struggle of powers. And philosophers can hang in dreams on the back of this tiger. Kierkegaard stresses Hegel's intellectual error. Hegel assures that reason encompasses all. It doesn't. Reason does not encompass all. Furthermore, there's bad faith in Hegel. He's denying individual responsibility that comes with existence. In the preface to the Philosophy of Right, Hegel says, philosophy is its own time captured in thought. Kierkegaard says, it's also quoted in the primary text, life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. This is how we should approach our time. Not to try to capture it in thought, but to understand that we must live forward. And there's a quote in a summary where Kierkegaard writes, I feel like a poor tenant who hired a small room under the roof beams of a magnificent and wonderful building, which is perpetually being embellished, noticing to my great despair that the foundation is collapsing. This is why I'm a poor tenant in a small room under the roof beams of this wonderful system, this wonderful building that everybody has, that philosophers are building, and I realize that the foundations are collapsing. This is from an early draft of Kierkegaard's book, The Philosophical Crumbs. Mind the title, Philosophical Crumbs. That's all we got. That's all Kierkegaard has to offer, philosophical crumbs, no systems. But in the second fragment, I'll read it to you, from the concluding unscientific postscript to the philosophical crumbs. Philosophical crumbs are about 140 pages, and the unscientific postscript is over 600 pages. This is page 7 from the primary text. Whether you incline to an empirical definition of truth as the agreement of thought with being, that is science, the agreement of thought with being, this is what science tried to do, being accordance with thought in accordance to being, or to an idealist definition as the agreement of being with thought, Hegel, in each case, great care must be taken over what is meant by being. And care must also be taken that the knowing human spirit is not tricked into losing itself in the indeterminate, becoming fancifully what no existing human being ever has been or can be. And he concludes, let no one misunderstand me. I am a poor existing spirit, just like all other human beings, but if I might, in any lawful and honest way, get assistance in becoming something extraordinary, the pure I is I, that's the absolute ego, absolute spirit in Hegel. If I can do that, if I can become that, then I'm always willing to say thanks for the gift and the good deed. But if it can only be done by saying 1, 2, 3, cocolorum, that's Hegel's system, then I'd rather remain what I am, a poor, existing individual human being. Philosophy, according to Kierkegaard, is not the attempt to build a system. It's not the attempt to find overall absolute knowledge of the world. Philosophy does also not stem from doubt, from methodological doubt, like Descartes' philosophy. I doubt everything. And maybe this makes you understand what Kierkegaard is doing. Doubt is just a thought experiment. Philosophy doesn't begin with doubt, it begins with concern and despair. In Dutch, Descartes is twijfel, doubt. Kierkegaard is vertwijfeling, concern and despair. In one of his early journals, Kierkegaard writes, what is lacking in my life is to be clear about what I should do instead of what I could know. I need to find a truth, which is my truth, a truth that I am willing to live and die for. What would it really matter, he adds, to understand all the systems in the world and gather all so-called objective knowledge if I don't find this personal truth, my truth, the truth I'm willing to live and die for? This is a radical personal philosophy. And no wonder many scholars have discussed Kierkegaard's biography. Kierkegaard is one of the philosophers most biographies have been written about. This is not that odd, because most philosophers, well, you can tell by me, are rather pale, dull, and boring. But most philosophers, Kant, he never left Koningsberg. He never left his hometown. And his fellow citizens could set their clocks exactly on Kant's daily stroll around the city. Hegel was just sitting there with his slippers and his robe by the fire, writing long hours on his system. That's what philosophers do. There is a strange prejudice in philosophy that the life of a philosopher is of no importance. We all think this. Even Heidegger. Heidegger was once planning a big course on Aristotle. And his students came to him, could you please also give an introduction on the life of Aristotle? Please, could you give us a sketch of his personality? We would love that. Then, it would come more alive for us. Heidegger said, okay, I'll start with a biography. So he began his class, Aristotle. He was born, he worked, and he died. wurde geboren, arbeitete und starb. And then he went on. This is what we all do. It's strange. It's strange. There's some exceptions, Nietzsche maybe. Kierkegaard, of course, definitely. Also Sartre. Now, in Kierkegaard's biographies, and this is the introduction to the content part of the class, his biographers are often his critics. They tell us that Kierkegaard was very depressed. Indeed, he was. He was a very depressive man. He suffered from depressions and melancholy. To some, Kierkegaard thought this too, it was caused by the lifelong depressions of his father. His father was, when he was doomed, he thought he was doomed, when he was a little shepherd's boy in Jutland, he was guiding the sheep and one of the sheep went lost and he started cursing that the sheep was lost. And his father thought that with this sin, he initiated the wrath of God, and all his wife and all his children would die. And indeed, his wife died, and practically all his children died. Only Kierkegaard and a brother survived. So depression. Another cause that Kierkegaard writes such crazy thoughts is that he was suffering from syphilis due to his wild life as a young man. By the way, it's very funny that the three true religious philosophers in Western culture, St. Augustine, Pascal, and Kierkegaard, all had a very, very wild life when they were young. They were really, Augustine was in and out all the brothels of Carthage, and Pascal in and out of all the brothels of Paris, and Kierkegaard did the same in Copenhagen. There's this wonderful phrase by Augustine. He admits it that he used to have this prayer: Lord, make me pure and pious, but please not just yet. Heer, maak mij vroom, maar nu nog niet. Yeah. Kierkegaard is also diagnosed as schizophrenic, and some scholar, how bored can you get, even counted 50 psychiatric disorders in Kierkegaard. Now, all of these diagnoses are not really important, and they're not even relevant. They are relevant in one respect. They show something very important. They're all attempts to do away with Kierkegaard, to do away with Kierkegaard's disturbing and discomforting thoughts. The close relationship between Kierkegaard's life and death is part of that. We don't like philosophers who are personal, but his thoughts are very discomforting. So Kierkegaard doesn't think about existence. He doesn't think about existence. He thinks and writes from the very heart of his own existence. His diaries, journals, are about 22 volumes thick. And he writes, for instance, about his breakup with his fiancée, Regina Olsen, the most notorious abandoned girl in the history of Western philosophy. And he wrote, a soldier posted at the front line of existence, should not be married. And elsewhere, truly existing people are like thunder. They scare the people, but eventually they will clear the air. Kierkegaard expected much of himself.
So after these biographical points about Kierkegaard, the ending of the lecture will delve more into the proper philosophy of Kierkegaard.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, even though the next part will be way shorter than what we have already listened to, I think it is really worth to have the full picture to appreciate what is coming up.
Yeah, I mean, Awee really takes his time to establish that Kierkegaard's philosophy and his general body of work is extremely personal. And it's kind of like, and with all the rumors about him being schizophrenic and people harking on his personal life.
His supposed marriage?
Yeah. It kind of becomes, you can't separate Kierkegaard's writing from Kierkegaard. It is deeply personal. And I have to say, I feel like still right now at the stage of academia, very personal philosophy, or very personal way of doing philosophy and writing is still like disregarded. It is not considered real or serious philosophy, despite Kierkegaard being such an established writer. And I think it's so just weird, and I mean, speaks to one of the biggest drawbacks of philosophy academia.
Agree. And a lot of philosophers that are well regarded, you are not allowed to use their style. There's only one way of doing philosophy, but you can use the philosophers who did that.
Yeah.
That's fine because they are now established, but don't do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like it almost, I think what Awee does is very valuable, that we should accept the personal, and it is very important. But I almost have to say, I feel like it set me up to failure, because now I keep doing this personal type of, like I do practical philosophy through phenomenology. And I feel like people are not really buying it.
It's also just to help us, like... People will now finally get what we're doing.
Yeah, this is a bit of an emotional support podcast.
Yeah. But all joking aside, the personal nature of Kierkegaard's philosophy is interesting in a lot of different regards. And one specific regard is, I think a lot of people find Kierkegaard very difficult to read.
Mm-hmm.
And I count myself amongst those people. I've read some things of Kierkegaard and I have struggled with most of it. I find it very interesting. I find it very worthwhile, but it is not something you can easily read. However, Kierkegaard has written in his journals, and I think Awee touches on this as well, that he does not want to be studied. He wants to be lived.
He does. And I think, the world of philosophy and academic philosophy potentially would be a better, fairer world if we lived the philosophy more instead of really keeping it in our heads.
And that is definitely what Awee is calling for in these lectures. And although our producer doesn't really like looking forward to other episodes, so I'll keep this to a minimum, but this lecture has mostly been setting up the stage to show where Kierkegaard comes up and what role he plays. Now, the last part of this lecture will be the first steps into Kierkegaard's philosophy. The second part of the lecture, which will be the next episode, this will become very, very clear that Kierkegaard wants to be lived and should be lived.
And with us taking our first steps into Kierkegaard, we can see what Awee has to say about Kierkegaard's own first steps into philosophy.
First step in his philosophy, his PhD thesis on the concept of irony with permanent reference to Socrates. A very controversial thesis. His defense lasted 7 hours in Latin. So Kierkegaard is talking about irony. As I've said, my position in philosophy, stirring thinking, is not critique, not analysis, not cynicism, and also not irony, but the irony that Kierkegaard ends up with is exactly what I mean, so don't worry. Let's work to it. Irony, the importance of irony, and this is for Kierkegaard very important, and I think so too, is to distance yourself from shared opinions, for common sense, bourgeois life. This is what irony does. You step away and you laugh about the stupidity of others. Irony plays with everything that is commonly taken for granted, steady opinions and convictions. Irony challenges the obvious, the too obvious but stale truths that most people live by. Stand-up comedy is irony at its best, And Kierkegaard uses Hegelian idiom. He says, irony is the nothingness we have to begin with. So not being, but nothingness we have to begin with. Because what irony tells us that we do not coincide with what is given. The things everybody says, everybody knows, even the things I think, are not evident. They are not evident. This is not about doubt. This is not about methodological doubt. This is about, irony is more playful, is more existential. An existential attitude towards what is happening around you. And Kierkegaard begins with an admiration of Socrates. Socrates shows us life is a possibility. This is what irony tells us. Life is not sketched out, no dotted lines. Irony is playing with all these lines. And so Socrates compared himself to a gadfly or a horsefly, stinging the Athenian citizens whom he compared with a slow and dim-witted horse, a gadfly. Another image is the famous electric eel. Socrates says, I'm like an electric eel. I bring people to a deadlock. I paralyze them so they can't go on with their busy lives. This is what irony to Socrates is all about. But Kierkegaard comes to the conclusion that Socrates' concept of irony is not good enough. It's too excessive. Socrates has a certain indifference towards life, indifference toward mortal existence and towards his friends. And if you read Plato's Apology, which is the book on Socrates' trial, where he is condemned to commit suicide because he was having a bad influence on the youth, Socrates says, you may not envy me, as I am going to die. But in fact, I am the most fortunate person here, as I will soon dwell in the ideal world. So Socrates doesn't take concrete, finite existence really serious. In the final analysis to Socrates, concrete existence is just a shadow of life. True life is in the world of ideas, is in the heavens. So Socrates' irony is an irony that loses its positive influence on our existing. Same goes for a second type of irony, which Kierkegaard calls romantic irony. Romanticism, poetic irony, the artists looking at the stupid people. I did Willem de Koning Academy when I was young, and I was a bit in this romantic irony. I thought everybody was bourgeois and stupid and dull, and I was special. Yeah. I wasn't. My teachers also knew. So it's like a poet, like Wordsworth. I was very good at art school, I must be honest. I wrote too much, that was my problem. I wander lonely as a cloud that floats over high o'er vales and hills. This is what the Wordsworth. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive moods, I flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. This is what the poet does. I can only live in my poems, Dutch poet Slauerhoff said. I'm a god in the depth of my thoughts, Close said. So the romanticist distances himself from finite existence. He prefers artistic play to dull reality. Art is more than life. Art is greater than life. Art is better than life. But by aestheticizing the world, we ironize or we distance ourselves from everything, Kierkegaard says. No decisions are made by the artist. No responsibility taken. And Kierkegaard insists on the importance of irony, but irony should be restrained, limited. This is where stirring thinking comes in. Only limited irony stirs up common thoughts, but at the same time remains dedicated to finite existence. Finite existence is our only dominion, where we live and strive for truth to live and die for. True irony opens up our lives as the possibility of real and full existence, without denying finitude, as the locus or essence of our existence. And you may have noticed that I used the word essence a bit hesitantly, and now I come to a very brief but very important point. Essence, the concept essence, stems from metaphysical thinking. Actually, it stems from Aristotle, where he said, Titoon, what is the world, what is being? And he answers, tis ousia, well, we must find the substance of being. The essence of the world is in scholastic, and still, this is still an opposition that everybody uses, also in daily life. So there's the essence of thing and the existence of thing, existentia and essentia. And philosophy, since Aristotle, should be concerned with the essentia of things, the essence of things. Even in philosophical anthropology, the essence of man. Take a tree. If the essence of a tree is that there are in very, very many existential variations, roots, a trunk, and branches. The essence of a tree, you can write about what goes for every tree. That is the essence of a tree. This is what philosophy is all about. The timeless essence, the traits that the tree essentially has. The existence of a tree is just the accidental, temporal occurrence of this or that tree. So it's minor. Philosophically speaking, we don't care about existence. It's philosophically not interesting. This is just an example of a tree. And philosophically speaking, even if we cut down all the trees, we're working on it, if we cut down all the trees in the world, still the essence of tree remains. This is where philosophy is all about. Kierkegaard, and this is why Kierkegaard is so damn important, turns it around and says, no, starting point is existentia. That is where philosophy should begin, and where what philosophy we should never leave. Existence. Heidegger, Sartre, we'll see, really made very fruitful comments on this reversal. Heidegger writes, our essence lies in our existence. We'll come back to this, but even now I would love it, I would really be happy, and I'm not a happy man. But it would make me happy if you have some gist of what I'm saying now. Our essence lies in our existence, which means that what we really are, our essence, but Heidegger writes it in quotation marks, as if it's not really a word I use. I use the word because everybody knows that it's a word, but in fact, you can't even use the word. Our essence, if you even want to speak of an essence, then it lies in your existence. Again and again, you and me, tirelessly, and sometimes very tired, have to reinvent, have to readdress what we are, our essence. And when we found our essence and we think this narrative about ourselves, we'll come to the conclusion that another narrative will be necessary, and another narrative. There is no essence of man. There is no essence in any one of us. There is no essence in the world, and Nietzsche might call this nihilism. Let's look at the bright side of it. Now we can begin to really think, get rid of all these metaphysical contemplations. Now we can really do philosophy. Okay, this is it. Existence. What can we philosophically and existentially do with our existence without metaphysically lying to ourselves, without keeping on hanging in dreams on the back of a tiger?